Summer went down faster than a cold beer on a warm night. Work stole most of my time. I missed my friends dearly. Since Patrick's incident, resulting in him losing an arm to a 7-foot-tall dog-like creature, we'd gone our separate ways. The merry band of Dogman hunters were no more. Joe, my lifelong friend, spent the summer with his family. He works from home and took full advantage. By all accounts, his summer went swimmingly. Patrick, a foul-mouthed French-Canadian who enjoys hunting with military-grade weapons, had his arm ripped off by a Dogman creature earlier this year. I saw it happen. Needless to say, Patrick kept to himself all summer, recuperating from his life-threatening injury. To my surprise, Patrick called me the other day. He had plenty to say. Turns out, he was dating his nurse. Her name is Cindy. She'd heard all about me and Joe and our adventures as Dogman hunters, and was eager to finally meet us in person. Thus, Joe and I were invited to spend the weekend at his cabin. Beers and barbecues and good fishing. Just like old times. I happily agreed. My stress level was at an all-time high. I needed to get away. To my amazement, Joe also agreed. You see, after our second brush with death, Joe was forbidden to see me or Patrick again. His wife told him so. For his own safety, she said, and for the safety of their children. That said, Joe's wife was taking the kids to see their grandparents for the weekend. What she didn't know wouldn't hurt her, right? Right. We loaded Joe's SUV with beer and fresh meat. We spoke nonsensically, avoiding the gory details of our previous trip to Patrick's cabin by the lake. The drive was treacherous. In the backwash of northern Ontario, one wrong turn could cost you your life. Patrick greeted us with an open arm. His ruggedly handsome face exuded confidence. He introduced us to Cindy. To my amazement, she wore more camouflage than he did. She looked as tough as rawhide. Her t-shirt said, "Guns don't kill people. I do." It was mid-afternoon. A cool breeze was wafting off the lake. The sky was a sea of blue, the leaves turning orange and candy apple red. Soon, the four of us were sitting by the lake, sipping ice-cold beer and telling stories. Patrick was trying his darndest to conceal his excitement. He's a proud man, but he was happy to have the gang back together. Cindy was full of questions. "Pat tells me you boys hunt Dogman creatures." Joe spit out his beer. He shifted in his seat, but remained silent. I gave a wary thumbs up. Having nearly been pulverized by the creature in the woods, I don't broach the subject lightly. Before she could get another word in, Patrick spoke up. "Come, have a look at this," he said, grinning ear to ear. He led us into the cabin, which was cluttered with weapons and traps and concoctions I'd never seen before. I'm no gun expert, but I knew those weapons were illegal. "Look there," Patrick pointed to the corner of the room. I shrieked. "I did it," Patrick boasted. "We did it," Cindy said, elbowing him playfully in the ribs. Next to the handmade coffee table, standing a good 7 feet tall, was the creature that ripped Patrick's left arm off. The Dogman. Stuffed like a Thanksgiving duck, its lifeless eyes followed my every move. Its razor-sharp claws were a cruel reminder of how close I came to becoming Dogman food. Patrick was beaming. "Killed the son of a bitch last week. You should have seen it," Cindy said, holding Patrick's hand. It was great. Patrick made me touch its matted fur. It took incredible willpower not to soil myself. We retreated to the lake. All the while, Patrick and Cindy regaled us with their latest adventure, the story of how they captured and killed an actual Dogman. We set up cameras around the cabin, Cindy told us. We had to, Patrick interrupted. The bastard wouldn't leave us alone. Joe tossed me a beer. Check this out. Patrick held up a noose. It was as ugly as the Dogman creature standing in the living room. Killed him with this. Of course, Joe said, cracking open a fresh can. He was on the edge of his seat. Joe loves to hunt. It's in his DNA. He comes from a lineage of skilled hunters. In fact, he could skin a bear faster than you can say Dogman hunters. Patrick filled us in. They set up traps around the cabin. Last week while sleeping, they were startled by a terrible noise coming from outside. Dogman. Patrick grabbed his sawed-off shotgun and peeked outside. Sure enough, the creature was creeping around the yard, going through the garbage. With the gun mounted to his one and only arm, he went out after it. Meanwhile, Cindy snuck around back. The Dogman approached Patrick, looking to finish him off once and for all. Cindy approached from the rear, carrying a bucket full of deer meat. She whistled. The creature turned and charged. Cindy dropped the meat into the center of the trap, which lay on the ground, attached to a tree. As the brute wrapped its eager claws around the stake, the trap sprung to life. The beast was swooped into the air, entangled in thick mesh. Dangling violently from a tree, the beast growled and groaned, kicking and clawing, trying desperately to escape. Patrick approached without caution. This was the moment he'd been dreaming of, long before losing his limb. He'd been trying to capture this creature for years. He finally did it. With the help of Cindy, of course. Beat the thing black and blue, Cindy snickered. Then we wrapped the noose around its ugly head, Patrick interrupted. Snapped its neck like a twig, Cindy added. It died right before our eyes. Sure did, Cindy smiled. Patrick and Cindy were sitting side by side, staring lovingly into each other's eyes. To them, this was romance. I cringed. My appetite was gone. How did I get talked into this? I looked to Joe for support and found none. Joe was enthralled. Once he gets excited about something, no one, not even his beautiful wife and loving family, can discourage him. The beer flowed like wine. By dinner, we'd heard the story more times than I'd seen Blade Hunter. Patrick swore us to secrecy. Word travels fast up north. Cindy fired up the barbecue. Soon our bellies were full of burgers, baked potatoes, and garden-fresh greens. Trouble arrived at sunset. Joe and I insisted on cleaning up. I did the dishes. Joe put everything away. When we returned outside, the fire was roaring. The sun was sinking low. The night was chilly, so we wrapped ourselves in flannel and warm blankets. As Patrick began telling his story, yet again, an ominous cry crashed through the night. It was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard. Then came another from across the lake. Dogman, Patrick said through clenched teeth. 2 of them. He nodded to Cindy, who scooted inside the cabin and returned with weapons. When she dropped a semi-automatic onto my lap, I flew from my seat like a firecracker. Unlike my gun-toting companions, I don't do semi-automatics. Patrick cursed me. Cindy nodded disapprovingly, then gave me a handgun. It looked as small as a flea. Joe gladly accepted his firearm and checked to see if it was loaded. It was. Meanwhile, the cooler remained heavily stocked, and the campfire raged on, providing much-needed light. The curious cries continued, like a symphony of lonesome laments. The solitary glow of the crescent moon filled me with discontent. I shivered. The sounds were getting closer. Something was growling from the edge of the woods. I turned. A pair of bloodshot eyes were peering at me. Get inside, Cindy ordered. Joe and I stared stupidly at one another. Now, we went. The cabin greeted us like a mischief of rats. We scurried to the window. Without warning, a large dog-like creature lunged in front of us, baring its teeth. Its snout was thick with foam, its claws crashing through the window with one strong swipe. A deafening shot rang out. We hit the floor. Everything went dark. My ears were ringing. My mind in disarray. Globs of blood dripped onto the floor like wet paint. Dogman blood. I gagged. Joe jumped to his feet. "Over here," he whispered. Joe crouched next to the door, rifle in hand, shaking. Patrick whooped and hollered, calling the Dogman every name in the book, and then some. A crowd of creatures responded. Their grisly growls echoed off the lake for miles. "How many of them are there?" Joe gasped, peeking out the door. I shrugged. Honestly, I didn't want to know. We were in the middle of nowhere. Out here, there were no neighbors. No one to rescue us. We were on our own. Joe gave me a nod before rushing outside, weapon first. "No," Patrick spat. Joe was ambushed. The pack of creatures had him surrounded. Patrick shot one in the back. The beast bellowed, releasing a blood-curdling cry that made my skin crawl. I hurried outside. Darkness devoured me. The flickering fire was now a smoldering speck of soot. The fingernail moon vanished. The sky was darker than death. Meanwhile, Patrick was perched in a tree, blanketing the beasts with bullets. Joe wailed in agony as the mangy mutts mauled him. Shots were fired. "Get out of the way!" Cindy shouted. She was close, but I couldn't see her. Footsteps approached. I swung around. A dogman was charging. Its breathing sounded like a sputtering motorcycle. I jumped inside the cabin just in time. "There's 4 of them," Patrick shouted. "One of them has Joe." My courage was floundering, but I soldiered on. I aimed my lowly handgun outside the shattered window. The beast had Joe in its grip. Without hesitating, I squeezed the trigger. Bam! I hit the thing in the shoulder. At the same time, Patrick fired, blowing a hole in its hind leg. The beast buckled. Joe sprang to his feet and fired point blank, hitting his assailant right between the eyes. Blood and brains exploded, covering him head to toe. Cindy came charging. She scooped Joe into her muscular arms, then retreated to the shed, barely avoiding the wrath of the menacing monster trailing close behind. "Listen up," Patrick shouted from the treetop. "When I give the word, go to the shed." Again, I scorned myself for being here. Apparently, spending a relaxing weekend with my pals was too much to ask. Now, my eyes focused on the shed, a stone's throw from the cabin. Now, God damn it. Patrick's voice slapped me in the face. I ran, gunning it towards the shed, screaming my head off. The race was on. Creatures were nipping at my heels. I twisted and turned, narrowly avoiding their grasp. Cindy was egging me on, shouting go, go, go. I ran as fast as I could, but it wasn't quick enough. One of them grabbed my shoulder, digging its claws deep into my flesh. I pried it off me, then dove head first into the shed. The door slammed shut behind me. The creatures crashed into the shed. They were relentless, and they're rebuttable. The rickety door was all that separated us, and it was taking a beating. The door belched as the beasts banged into it, again and again. We were trapped. My shoulder was a mess, my blood-stained sweater torn to shreds. Cindy quickly patched up my wounds. The pain was egregious. "You'll be fine," she snapped. "Hold still." I did. Cindy bandaged my wound using a dusty rag. Then she found her phone and started punching keys. Her determination was remarkable. She was like the woman from the Terminator movies, only French. Someone touched my shoulder. I screamed in agony. Joel looked haggard, far worse than me. Blood and bruises and scratches galore. His wounds were deep, his water bucket eyes barely open. Clearly, he needed a doctor. "This is it, old buddy," he managed to say. "This is the end." My heart sank. I'd known Joe my entire life. We'd been best friends for as long as I could remember. This isn't how it was supposed to end. Cindy shook her head. "Nobody dies on my watch." Her phone vibrated. "Hang tight," she ordered. Gunshots rang like rockets. Patrick was going ballistic. "Hey, fleabags, want some of this?" Cindy smiled. All at once, she was beautiful. Then she jumped outside and attacked, firing round after round, screaming bloody murder. Rifle blasts and curse words filled the dead of night. I peeked outside. What I saw still haunts me. Patrick was luring the creatures into his cabin. Mounds of meat carpeted the cabin floor. The beasts were like a pack of hyenas, gorging on the feast. Meanwhile, Cindy was open firing, except she wasn't hitting them. She was aiming wide, avoiding the cabin. Then I noticed the makeshift box in Patrick's hand, silver and clunky, with an antenna poking out the end. Cindy stopped firing as Patrick joined her. They shared a quick embrace. Then Patrick pressed the red button. Blammo. The entire cabin was blown to smithereens. The sheer force of the blast sent me flying. The Dogman creatures didn't know what hit them. The world went still. My body and mind shut down. I lay motionless for an undisclosed amount of time until a strong hand picked me up. "Are you okay?" Cindy asked. I was dazed and confused, unable to respond. I hurt everywhere. "You see that?" Patrick bellowed, bobbing up and down. Cindy helped Joe into the microbus, and he was rushed to the hospital. When I say rushed, I use that term loosely. This far north, a 2-hour drive is considered a quick jaunt. I went with them. Patrick stayed behind, keeping a close eye on the wreckage. Cindy boasted the entire trip. Turns out, they'd been preparing for this all summer. They simply forgot to inform us that Patrick's cabin was stuffed with explosives. The plan was to lure the creatures into the cabin, then blow them straight to hell. I didn't bother explaining how dangerous and stupid their plan was. I was too tired. Besides, their plan worked. My wounds were minor. I got off lucky. Joe, not so lucky. The nurses asked plenty of questions. Cindy was prepared for this. "It was a bear attack," she said flatly. "When all else fails, blame the bears." It worked. Joe was stitched up and released the following week. Needless to say, his wife was not impressed. Fortunately, she's a forgiving woman. Joe is doing everything possible to make it up to her. I think he'll be all right. They've been through this before. Although I doubt I'll ever see him again. Patrick and Cindy moved to North Bay. They've opened an ammunition shop, specializing in hunting extraordinary creatures. The store is called Beasts by the Bay. Patrick kept a Dogman's head as a souvenir and proudly displayed it behind the counter. His tall tales loom large in his legend. Me, not much has changed. I went back to work Tuesday morning, and nobody was the wiser. My workmates know nothing of my adventures as a Dogman hunter. To them, I'm a quiet yet responsible worker, someone who shows up on time, keeps to himself and rarely complains. They didn't even notice my injuries. The northerly town of Kopuskasing has quieted down again. The random slaying of small animals has subsided. For now. The forecast is calling for snow by the end of the week. A long and arduous winter is expected. What will become of Dogman? Only time will tell. My guess is they'll migrate further north, where they'll remain undetected for years. You see, these creatures adapt. They feed. They kill. Then they move on. May this story serve as a warning. If you're up in northern Ontario and see a creature in the woods, run away. As fast as you can. Take it from someone who knows. Up here, the creatures will tear you apart, limb by limb, and feast on your flesh. Their destruction knows no bounds. There are creatures in North Ontario. Creatures that kill. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Descent into the Unknown for more terrifying stories.